It's a paperwork thing, sweetheart. Carriers are a nightmare. Eat something. That's my mother, Diane Ashgrove, 59 years old, saying it across her own kitchen island on the 11th of February at 10 past 6 in the evening, pushing a plate of cut pears at me like the pears were an answer. I was 4 months pregnant. I had spent that afternoon at a pharmacy counter watching a girl in a blue smock run my insurance card 3 times. Declined, declined, not found. Not declined the way a card gets tired. The other one. The one where the screen says the person does not exist. My name is Ren Ashgrove. I'm 31. I worked for my parents' company, Ashgrove Heating and Air. My father's name on 11 trucks. My mother's handwriting on the payroll. For 11 years. I ran their service board. I'm the voice you got at 2 in the morning in January when your furnace died and your kids were cold. 11 years. And on every single check I ever took from them, there was a line in a column marked MED and a number next to it. And that number came out before I ever touched it. I never questioned it once. Who audits their own mother? I didn't cry in that pharmacy. I want that out of the way early. Because the version where I go down in aisle 4 is the version where I'm a person this happened to. And that is not what happened. I stood there with my hand flat on my stomach and told the girl in the blue smock it was fine. I'd sort it out. She said, "I'm sure it's just a glitch." I said, "I'm sure it is." My voice was perfectly level. I hated it for that. 8 weeks before that pharmacy, I stood in that same kitchen and told my parents they were going to be grandparents. 14 days after that, they signed something. Now here's what you need before anything else, because the whole thing turns on it. There's one page in this story that I did not write, did not find, and did not go looking for. They wrote it, in December, on a Sunday, in the office off the shop floor, in a building I had a key to. It's the form a carrier wants when an employer takes somebody off a group plan, a termination of coverage rider. One page, about as dramatic as a receipt for gas. It has a date on it. And at the bottom, 2 signature lines side by side, because a small group needs 2 officers. Both are filled in. Both. I'm not going to tell you the date yet. You have to see how we got there, or you won't feel what it does. And I need you to feel it. And there's a second thing, and it's worse than the first. And it's the reason I can hear my own blood when I think about it. 9 pay stubs. 9. After that date. Everyone with a number sitting in the MED column. Everyone taken out of my check for a plan that had not existed since December, by the 2 people whose names are on the bottom of that page. I didn't know either of those things existed until the 11th of June, in a small office on the 3rd floor of a hospital, when a woman with a lanyard and a coffee mug turned her monitor a few degrees and read them out loud in a completely ordinary voice. She wasn't accusing anybody. That's the part to hold on to. She was trying to help me. Come sit with me a minute. Close the door if you've got one to close. This one's for the nights the house is too quiet, and I'd rather not tell it by myself. If any of this lands somewhere you live, leave the like. And subscribe if you want to keep sitting here with me. Only if it's real. I don't want polite. And before I take you back, tell me one thing down in the comments. Tell me about a time somebody told you they were handling it, and you found out later what handling it meant. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I read them. They're the reason I keep the light on. Now, let me take you back to a Sunday dinner on the 15th of December, and the sound my mother made. She screamed. I got about 4 words out. I'd rehearsed it in the car, then dropped every bit of it and just said, "I'm 9 weeks." And my mother put both hands over her mouth and screamed into them. And then she was around the table crying into my hair with her whole body shaking, saying, "Oh, honey, oh, honey, oh, honey." I've spent a year trying to make that not real. It was real. Know that going in. Because if you think she was faking in that kitchen, then you're watching a different story, an easier one. And the easy one is a lie. My father stood up. Russell Ashgrove is 62. He started the company in a rented bay in 1994 with one van and a beeper. And he has never in his life finished a sentence with a feeling in it. That man communicates entirely through equipment. If he loves you. You find out because he shows up on a Saturday and replaces your water heater and won't take the money. He looked at the floor a while. He said, "Well." Then he said, "Well," again. Then he went out to the garage, and we heard the door, and he did not come back in for 40 minutes. 3 days later, a crib arrived at my house. He'd built it. Nobody said a word about it. Then or ever. It came on a Wednesday in the bed of a truck, in pieces, wrapped in the moving blankets he uses for compressors, with the hardware in a coffee can. My father built a crib. Hold that, because I have to hold it. And it hasn't gotten 1 ounce lighter in a year. 14 days after that scream, my parents drove to the office on a Sunday between Christmas and New Year's to close out the year in the books. And while they were closing the year, they closed me. I'm getting ahead. I do that with this part. Let me put you back at the island. It's a paperwork thing, sweetheart. Carriers are a nightmare. Eat something. The 11th of February, 10 past 6. And then my mother did a thing with her hands. She wiped them on the dish towel over her shoulder. Twice. They were dry. That's the tell. It took me 4 more months to learn it. My mother wipes clean hands when a sentence she just said needs somewhere to go. I said, "Mom." It didn't say declined. It said not found. It said the member ID doesn't exist. And she said, "Well, that's what I mean. That's exactly the kind of thing they do. Do you know what they put Marlene through? 6 weeks. 6 weeks on the phone. Do you know what they put Marlene through? Stand back and watch the workmanship." I walked in with a fact. A screen. 1 sentence on 1 screen. And in a single move, my mother turned it into a story about a carrier who does this to people. And now there's a they in the room. And she and I are shoulder to shoulder on the same side of it. My mother has never argued with me in her life. She doesn't have to. She quietly changes who the enemy is and lets you keep walking. And my father, from the table, not looking up from his phone, said the sentence that ran the next 4 months of my life. "Your mother's handling it." 3 words. From Russell Ashgrove, that's a keynote address. People always ask me how I didn't know. I felt looked after. That's the answer. I did not know, because I had a mother. And there is no version of me that gets to have a mother and also see this coming. You can have the eyes, or you can have the mother. You don't get both. And nobody tells you you're choosing. Here's the only thing I did that night. I asked when. She had an answer ready, which should have been the whole story right there. She said, "Before the scan. Honey, that's the one that matters. That's the 2nd of March. The 2nd of March. The anatomy scan. 20 weeks. It was on my refrigerator on a magnet shaped like a strawberry. Because when you've lost 2, you don't write those dates in a calendar. You put them somewhere you'll walk past. The 2nd of March. My mother picked my scan. Not a Tuesday. Not the end of the month. She reached into my life and pulled out the one date I'd have crawled to. And she made it her deadline, because she knew that if she gave me that date, I would stop asking for 11 weeks. I think she meant it. I think my mother stood at that island genuinely believing she had 11 weeks to find a door in a room, and that she'd find one, and that nobody would ever have to know there had been a room. She had 11 weeks. She used everyone. She just used them on the wrong problem. The 19th of February, I called the carrier myself. Not because I doubted her. Because I'm me. I reconcile. It isn't a virtue. It's a nervous system. I wasn't checking on my mother. I was going to hand her a case number and be helpful. I was on hold 51 minutes, at my own desk, at the board, 6 feet of whiteboard, and every magnet on it is a house with no heat in it. 51 minutes, and I got a human being. I gave her my name, my date of birth, the group number, 3390, which I did not have to look up, because I'd been writing it on other people's forms for 11 years. And she said, "Okay, I've got the group. And your name was?" I said it again. And she said, "Hmm, hmm. You know that sound. That's the sound of somebody's eyes moving across a screen you can't see. Ma'am, you're not showing as active on this group." I said, "Right. That's why I'm calling. It's a paperwork thing." I said that. I heard myself hand a stranger my mother's sentence like it was a fact I owned outright. And she said, "No, ma'am. I mean, there's no error flag. There's no open case. You're not pending anything." A pause. Keys. "There's a term date." I said, "What does that mean?" And she said, "It means somebody sent us a form." Somebody sent us a form. I had a receiver against my ear and I was looking at 6 feet of whiteboard. And 40 feet away, through an interior window, my mother sat at her desk with a calculator and a cup of tea, and her back was to me. I said, "Can you tell me the date on it?" She said, "I can't release plan documents over the phone, only to the subscriber or the plan administrator." I said, "Who's the plan administrator?" And there was a pause. Not a long one. Just long enough for a woman 4 states away to read a name off a screen and decide, correctly, that it was not her job to feel anything about it. She said, "It's Diane Ashgrove." And then, because she was good at her job, and because she had a script, and because it was the next thing on it, that woman gave me the only piece of real help anybody gave me for 4 months. And I threw it away. She said, "Ma'am, I do want to make sure you know, if you lost group coverage, you get a special enrollment period, 60 days from the term date. You can go get an individual plan. No questions. Pregnancy doesn't block you." I said, "60 days from when?" "Keys." She said, "Your term date's the 31st of December, so that's the 1st of March. After the 1st of March, you're locked out until open enrollment in November." The 1st of March. I wrote it on a sticky note. I still have the sticky note. It's the only thing in this entire story I wrote in my own handwriting. And it says 3 words and a date. Special enroll, March 1st. 10 days. Now hold 2 dates next to each other, the way I couldn't, because I was standing up with a headset on, and my mother was 40 feet away with a cup of tea. The door locked on the 1st of March. My mother's promise came due on the 2nd. She picked a date one day past the last day. I've turned that over about 9,000 times, and the honest answer, the one I'd say under oath, is that I don't think she knew. I don't think my mother had any idea a 60-day window existed, because she didn't read the rider, because she has never once read a thing she signed. That's not a defense. That's so much worse. She didn't aim at my window. She reached into my refrigerator for a date that was convenient to her, and my window happened to be standing there. I took the sticky note and I walked 40 feet. Across a shop floor, past the parts cage, to a desk where a woman was drinking tea. 11 seconds. It cost $61,000. And I want to give it to you in detail, because somebody listening is about to walk their own 40 feet. I did not go over there angry. I went over there to help. I said, "Mom, I called them." And my mother turned around in her chair, and she smiled at me, warm, the whole face, both eyes. She said, "Oh, honey, of course there's a term date. That's what I've been fighting. That's the whole fight. Slow down here. This is the best work my mother ever did." And she did it sitting down, in under 4 seconds, holding a cup of tea. She didn't deny it. Denying it would have been a wall. and you can walk into a wall and find out it's a wall. Instead, she took the true fact I'd carried across 40 feet of concrete, picked it up, turned it around, and handed it back with a different handle on it. That's what I've been fighting. She said it the way you'd say we've been over this. Like I'd come in to tell her the sky was blue and interrupted her while she was busy being the only person in this family who ever looks up. I said, "The term date's the 31st of December, Mom." And she said, "I know when it is." That's the only true sentence my mother said in 4 months, and I heard it as competence. I said, "There's a window, 60 days. It closes the 1st of March. She said I can buy an individual plan. Pregnancy doesn't block it." And my mother put her tea down, and she said, "Ren, listen to me, do not do that. Hear it whole, because if you think you'd have seen through it, you're wrong, and I need you to be wrong gently." She said, "If you go out and buy a plan on the 1st of March, you have just agreed with them. That's what enrollment is. It's you signing something that says yes. I was terminated. My case dies the second you do that. They close it. They love it when you do that. It's the cheapest day of their year." She counted it on her fingers. My mother counts on her fingers when she wants you to see the arithmetic happening. You'd be paying twice, $400 a month out of your pocket for a thing I am 9 days from making them give you for free. Retroactive. Every claim. Back to January. 9 days from having them by the throat. I've never done the books at a company. My mother had done them for 30 years. She said the word retroactive, and I felt my shoulders come down 2 inches. And then she finished it. And this is where I stopped being able to be funny about my mother. She said, "And I'll say one more thing, and then I'm done." She said, "You're 17 weeks." She said, "Do you remember 14? 14 weeks. The second one. 2 years before. In the spring, my mother drove me, because Sam had a job 40 minutes out. And I called her, and she was in my driveway in 9 minutes with the car still running. She was there. She held my hair. She's the only other person on this earth who was in that room. And she put it on the table between us like a card she'd been holding since the spring of a different year. She said, "You do not need this in your body right now. Give it to me. Let me carry it. Let me carry it." She said, "Carry the way a man says here. Let me get that when what he wants is your keys." And I said, "Okay." That's the whole thing. My mother reached into the worst week of my life and used it to take a piece of paper out of my hand. And I said, "Okay." And I went back to my desk and sat down in front of 6 feet of houses with no heat in them. And I felt grateful. Sit in that with me a second, because it's the part I still can't get all the way around. I walked back across that floor feeling looked after. I felt like a woman with a mother. 40 feet in one direction, I had a fact, and 40 feet back, I had a feeling. And the feeling was better. And I took the feeling. I put the sticky note in my back pocket. I did not look at it again for 11 days. If you have ever apologized to somebody for noticing something, if you've ever brought a person a true thing and left the room feeling like you'd been a burden about it, put the word "carried" down in the comments. Just the word. I want to see how many of us there are. And I'm not asking rhetorically. I'm going to come back to that word at the end. Because there's a thing about carrying I did not understand until a woman with a lanyard said it out loud in a hospital. Stay with me, because the 1st of March is a Saturday, and nothing happens on it at all. That's what I have to tell you about the 1st of March. Nothing happened. No letter. Nothing beeped. Nobody called. Doors like that don't make a sound when they close. Because they're not doors. They're a field in a database that flips from one value to another at midnight. In a building in another state where nobody works weekends. I know exactly what I did that day. I went to a baby consignment sale in a church basement with my husband and bought a used glider for $40. and Sam carried it to the car on his head like a man in a cartoon. And I laughed so hard I had to sit down on a curb. That's the 1st of March. It was one of the best days I had that year. Sam Boyd is 33. He builds cabinets with his uncle out of a 2-bay shop. 2 men and a dust collector. And he's never had insurance a day in his adult life. Because you can't. Not on that. When we got married, we did the arithmetic at a kitchen table. And the arithmetic said one of us gets covered. And it's the one with the group plan. I was 20 the first time I saw that line on a check. First one I ever took from them. I must have looked at it a beat too long. Because my mother reached over and took it out of my hand and turned it around and put her finger on the number. And she said it warmly, the way a woman hands you a key. That's your share, sweetheart. Family or not. Everybody carries their share here. Or it isn't a company. It's a charity. I was 20 years old and I thought that was the most grown-up sentence anybody had ever said to me. I've repeated it to other people since and felt sophisticated saying it. Write that one down. We're going to need it. So I carried it. Of everything I did for that household, the books, the calls, the 2 a.m., the thing I was proudest of, the one piece of adult infrastructure I personally put under my family, was that card. I carried the insurance, me, the girl. And that's what was in my wallet on the 11th of February, when a screen said the person does not exist. The sticky note was in the back pocket of a pair of jeans in my closet. I hadn't been able to get into those jeans since the 2nd week of February. That's not a metaphor. I want to be plain about it. Because it's the truest thing in this story, and I'd never write it if it weren't just what happened. The only piece of paper that could have saved my daughter's first year was in the pocket of a pair of pants I couldn't put on anymore. Because I was pregnant. Which was the entire reason I needed it. The 2nd of March, we found out she was a girl. The day after the door. We paid $680 cash for that scan, on a card that was Sam's. And my mother, who insisted on coming, said, "Put it on my card." And I said, "Mom, it's fine. It's coming back anyway, right? Retroactive?" And my mother said, "That's right." She said it looking at a magazine. A girl. 4 chambers, 10 and 10, 20 weeks, and a spine like a zipper. And in the parking lot afterward, my mother put both hands on my face and cried and said, "You did it." Here's what people get wrong about my mother, and it's what makes her dangerous. She was not lying in that parking garage. She was thrilled. And in a filing cabinet at her own office, there was a page with her signature on it. And both were true at the same time, in the same woman, on the same afternoon. That's the whole illness. Not that she can lie. Anybody can lie. It's that she doesn't have to. The 18th of March, my mother rented a shred truck. This is the day it should have ended. It didn't. And the reason is a sentence my mother said out loud in front of 4 people. Small companies do this. You hit a certain age as a business, and there are 11 filing cabinets and a room you can't walk through. So you call somebody. And a truck with a hopper parks in your lot and eats paper. Everything pre-2025, Diane's rule. She was in a fantastic mood. She had a clipboard. She was wearing sneakers. Which she never does. She was directing traffic in her own parking lot like a woman at a bake sale. And the machine made a noise like a garbage disposal that had gotten into something structural. She fed at the payroll registers. Everyone, 1998 through 2024, 26 years of paper with a number in a MED column on every line, into a hopper, in a parking lot, in March. And I watched her do it and thought, good. That room's been a mess for years. And then my mother turned around, with the clipboard. In front of Bev Lindquist and Marcus Kettering and a guy from the shred company whose name I never learned, and she said, in that warm voice, the voice she uses for the whole room, "Ren, honey, bring me your old stub file. You don't keep those. Do you? Nobody keeps those. 4 feet. She was 4 feet from me. She asked for it out loud, in front of witnesses, with a running machine behind her that would have turned it into confetti in 9 seconds. My mother asked me for the only evidence in this story, in a completely pleasant voice. And every single thing that happened afterward was standing in that parking lot, waiting to see what I'd say. And I said, "I keep everything, Mom." And my mother laughed. And she said, "Of course you do. You're mine." And she went back to her clipboard. She didn't ask twice. She could have. I'd have handed it over, gone home and brought it in Tuesday and put it in her hands, because it was my mother asking and it was old paper. Here's the answer. And it took a year and a woman with a lanyard to find it. In March, my mother could not imagine losing. She'd run those books 30 years and never once been audited. Not by a carrier, not by the state, not by my father. There was no version of Diane Ashgrove's life in which a piece of paper beat her. Paper was a thing she made. Paper did what she said. So she stood in a parking lot and fed a machine 26 years of her own arithmetic and felt terrific about it. And let the one copy she couldn't reach walk out of that lot in a Honda at 5 o'clock. And here's the part I'd cut if I were making it up. The registers she shredded weren't the record. We ran payroll through a service. Everybody does. A company in another state with a server. And 11 trucks worth of wage data on it. The paper in those cabinets was a courtesy copy. A printout. My mother spent an afternoon in the sun killing a photocopy. She thought the paper was the fact. She's always thought that. That's the whole religion. Get to the page and you've got the truth. Because in my mother's house, the page and the truth were the same thing. And she was the one holding the pen. Bev Lindquist watched her do it. 67 years old. She's answered that phone since 1998. She keeps a tin of butterscotch in the second drawer. And she gave me one at 2 in the morning in January of my first winter there, when I was 20 and crying in the parts cage because I'd sent the van to the wrong house. She stood by the door with her arms folded and watched my mother shred 26 years. Then she looked at me across the lot. I waved at her. Bev did not wave back. She went inside. I thought she was hot. It was March. There were people who knew. There are always people who knew. They're not villains. They're just people. And people are mostly a hallway. Things pass through them. On the 5th of April, my father came to look at a furnace that did not need looking at. That's the entire language of Russell Ashgrove. He called on a Saturday and said the word cycling, and I said, "Okay, Dad." And he was in my basement 40 minutes. There was nothing wrong with that furnace. He knew it in 90 seconds. He stayed down there 38 and a half more. He came up with his hands black and washed them at my sink for a long time. Longer than hands take. Sam was at the shop. It was just us. And my father stood there with the water running and looked out the window at my yard. And he said, "Your mother does the paperwork." I said, "I know, Dad." And he said, "She does all of it." Then he shut the water off, dried his hands on my dish towel, went out to his truck and drove away. 10 words. Your mother does the paperwork. She does all of it. 10 words. From a man who'd been in a basement 40 minutes working up to them. And I thought, he doesn't like talking about the office. That's what I thought. I thought my father was uncomfortable. He was not uncomfortable. That was Russell Ashgrove at 62 years old, spending every word he had. His signature is the second one on that page, the same signature that's on 11 trucks. He signed it on the 29th of December. He built a crib on the 18th. And on the 5th of April, he got exactly as close to the door as a man like that can get. And stopped. There's a thing men his age do where they walk you to the edge of a room, point their chin at it, and think they've shown you the room. He didn't tell me. He told the window. And I didn't hear it. He said the truest thing he had, and I handed him a paper towel. 10 words is not enough. 10 words is a man buying himself the right to say, later. that he tried. He got what he paid for. He tried. The 30th of April is the day I did the arithmetic, got the right answer, and felt good about it. My mother is the one who taught me to reconcile. She sat me down at 20 and showed me how to tie a stub to a statement, and she said, if you can't tie it, it isn't real. So on the 30th of April, I sat at my kitchen table and did the April cleanup, and I pulled my stub. Because I always pull my stub. And there it was. Med, $68.04. Semi-monthly, twice a month. The way it had been since I was 20, and it was $11, and I thought $11 was a lot. And I want to tell you what I felt, looking at that number on the 30th of April. 11 weeks after a pharmacy counter told me I did not exist. Relief. I felt relief. Because a deduction means a plan. Money's going out the door. So there's a door. My mother's fighting them, and the meter's still running, and when she wins, all of it comes back. Retroactive. Every claim. The way she said with her fingers up. That is the stupidest thought I have ever had in my life. And I'm telling you because I think somebody listening is having it right now about something. The deduction wasn't evidence the plan existed. The deduction was the plan. $68.04 twice a month was the thing that kept me from making one phone call I couldn't be talked out of. It cost my mother nothing, and it bought her everything. It bought her my calm. $136 a month. Nobody gets rich on $136 a month. My father has a boat, a 19-foot Lund with a bad trailer light. But it exists. And it means the answer to why is not money. They did it because stopping it would have required telling me. That's the crime, not the taking. The not telling was the expensive part. The taking was just what it cost. Nobody sat in a dark room. Every other Friday, my mother opened the payroll and did not stop a line item. And each time, that was easier than the alternative, and the alternative never got easier. So it never happened. 9 times, 9 separate afternoons, not one of them made in anger. The bills started in April. The lab first, $340 for blood work. And I looked at it and thought it was a mistake. Because I'd never gotten a bill for blood work in my life. Then the OB's office, then the lab again. I called my mother. She said, "Send them to me. That's what the case is for." "Honey, don't you dare pay one of those. They all get paid retroactive when this lands. And if you pay now, you'll just have to chase your own money." So I didn't. I put them in a folder. See that folder? Because it's the whole rest of my life. Green, 2 pockets. From an office supply store. Left pocket. Bills. Right pocket. Stubs. Because when you reconcile, you keep the thing you owe next to the thing you were paid. And that's not a decision I made. That's just where those go. My mother taught me that when I was 20 years old. And then she spent an afternoon in a parking lot feeding a machine 26 years of paper. And could not conceive that her own daughter had a green folder on a shelf over the microwave with both halves of it in the same place. The 31st of May, the deduction stopped. I saw it in about 4 seconds. I pulled the stub the way I always pull the stub, and the MED line was gone. Not 0. Gone. The line wasn't there. I called my mother from my car, and my mother said, "It's handled." She said, "It's done, honey. I told you I'd handle it. Go put the crib together." Go put the crib together. I sat in a parking lot and cried so hard I had to put the phone down on the seat. The ugly kind. With the noise. I called Sam and couldn't get a sentence out, and he thought something had happened to the baby. And then I drove home and we took my father's crib out of the box. It had been in the garage since the 18th of December, and I had not been able to touch it. Because when you've lost 2, you don't build the crib. That's the rule. You don't build it until you're sure. I was sure. On the 31st of May, I was sure. It took 2 hours. because Sam builds cabinets for a living and would not let one dowel go in crooked. And there's a photograph of me on that floor at 11 at night, 32 weeks pregnant, laughing, with a coffee can of hardware in my lap. I've looked at that photograph maybe 6 times. I can't do it much. Now here's what actually happened on the 31st of May. And after this, you're going to be ahead of me for a while. And I need you to be. I need somebody to have been ahead of me. My mother did not fix anything. My mother stopped a line item. That's all that happened in the world that day. A woman who has run payroll for 30 years opened a screen and removed a deduction. And a woman who has run payroll for 30 years knows exactly what a deduction is when somebody eventually looks at it in a room with a lawyer in it. It's a fingerprint. There was a baby coming. Everything was about to have a bill on it and a person in it and a date. And my mother, who had spent 5 months failing to find a door in a room she'd bricked herself, finally did the one competent thing she did in this whole story. She stopped leaving fingerprints. 11 days before I walked into a hospital believing I had insurance. And she told me to go build the crib. The 8th of June was a Sunday. Everything in my family happens on a Sunday. I told them on a Sunday. They signed it on a Sunday. Sundays when the Ashgroves do the important things. Because Sundays when you're not working. And my family has never once been able to sit still in a room with nothing to fix. I had a headache Saturday and took something and it didn't go. Sunday morning, it was behind my eyes with spots in it. Little gray ones that swam when I looked at the ceiling. And my hands didn't fit my hands. I stood at the sink looking at my own fingers thinking, those are fat. Those are somebody else's. I called the after-hours line at 1 in the afternoon, and a nurse said the words, "Come in now," in a voice with nothing in it at all. And that's how I learned that a voice with nothing in it is the worst sound in medicine. Sam drove. And on the way out the door, my husband stopped and turned around and went back into the kitchen and took the green folder off the shelf over the microwave. I said, "Sam, what are you doing?" He said, "They're going to want the card." That's it. That's the whole reason. He is a man who brings the folder. He'd been watching me file bills into it for 6 weeks, and he knew where the card was because the card was in it. And his wife's face was wrong, and he was scared out of his mind, and the only thing he could think to do with his hands was bring the paperwork. He put a green 2-pocket folder on the floor of the truck at 10 past 1 on the 8th of June. Everything after that happened because of that. 176 over 112. They took it 3 times because the first 2. The nurse didn't believe the machine. There's a look people in scrubs get where they stop looking at you and start looking at each other. And the room fills up. And nobody's rude. Nobody's rushing. And somehow that's how you know. Severe preeclampsia, 34 weeks and 0 days. There's a magnesium drip that makes you feel like you're being cooked from the inside out. And you can't have water. And I begged for ice and was told no in the kindest voice I've ever heard. They tried to hold it a day. She wasn't having it. At about 8 in the evening, the numbers on my chart did a thing, and a doctor whose name I never got put her hand flat on my ankle. My ankle, not my shoulder. I don't know why I remember the ankle, and said, "We're going tonight." Sam Boyd is 33 and built like a door, and I watched the color leave him like a shade pulled from the bottom. Nell Boyd was born at 11:52 at night on the 8th of June. 4 pounds, 1 ounce. I heard her. That's what I got. One sound, from behind a blue curtain, about the size of a cat. And then 11 people took her out of the room at a walk that was not quite a run, and I lay there under lights with my arms strapped down and asked Sam if that was her. And he couldn't answer me. I did not see my daughter for 19 hours. At 2 in the morning, somebody put a clipboard in my hands. I was shaking. That's the magnesium. It just does that. And there was a form. And the form said the NICU is a 2-visitor unit, and you have to list who's allowed up. And I wrote Sam. And then I wrote Diane Ashgrove. And then I wrote Russell Ashgrove. At 2 in the morning on the 9th of June, bleeding, shaking, 4 hours out of an operating room. I put my parents' names on a list so they could hold my daughter. Remember that. I need you to hold on to that for 2 days. On the 11th of June, they called me down to the 3rd floor. That's routine. Nobody's being cruel. When a baby goes to the NICU, somebody from financial counseling sits down with the family, because the alternative is you find out in September in an envelope. I was 3 days out of abdominal surgery. A volunteer named Denise pushed me in a chair, and I held a pillow against my middle the way they teach you. And my staples were still in, 22 of them. And I know because I counted them in a mirror, because I count things. And when the elevator opened on 3, my parents were standing in the corridor with balloons, 6 of them, mylar, silver and pink, one shaped like a stork, tied with curly ribbon, and behind them, 4 people from their church, Ward and Lorraine Pettibone, and 2 more whose names I won't say, because they didn't do anything and they've had a year of this too. They'd been in the building 2 hours. Now here's a fact, flat, because it's the whole story and it's the size of a coin. You cannot take a balloon into a NICU. Not mylar, not latex, not one. There's a laminated sign on the door of every neonatal ICU in this country, and my parents had been in that building 2 hours. They were not at the 7th floor door. They were in a 3rd floor corridor, by the family waiting area, where the chairs are, and the coffee is, and the people are. You do not bring 6 mylar balloons to a unit that does not permit balloons. That's not a mistake. That's a decision about what floor you intend to be seen on. My mother came at me fast when she saw the chair, both hands out. Oh, honey, oh, look at you. And she took the handles from Denise and pushed me the last 20 feet herself. And the church people made the sound people make. Faye Trumbull's office is a glass box. Everything that happened in a fishbowl, 3 walls of glass, a desk, 2 chairs, and a door that swings but doesn't latch, because they took the latch off, because of what people do in there. She had a mug from a 5K on her desk. That's what I looked at. Faye Trumbull is somewhere in her 50s, reading glasses on a beaded chain, and a voice like a woman who has done this 11,000 times and never once gotten hard about it. She looked at me, then at the 6 people behind my chair, and she said, "Do you want them in here?" That's the question. That's the hinge of my whole life, and it took 4 seconds. I said yes. Not because I had a plan. I had no plan. I had 22 staples and 9 hours of sleep across 3 days, and a daughter who weighed 4 pounds and something for the pain that made the walls sit closer. I said yes because my mother is the plan administrator, and I could not do a phone call, and I wanted my mom. After everything I have just told you, I still wanted my mother in the room. That's not stupidity. That's just what she was to me, right up until the second she wasn't. And there was no gap in between where I could have gotten out. So they came in. Mom took the chair. Dad stood in the doorway with the balloons, because somebody had to hold them, and it was him. My father stood in a doorway holding 6 mylar balloons for the entire thing. And Faye opened the file and said the thing she says. "Okay, let's see what we're working with." She turned the monitor a few degrees, not toward me, toward herself, so she could read it. Right now, this admission is coded self-pay, and the estimate on a 34-weeker with a section is about $61,000. $61,000. I'm not rounding. Faye rounded, out loud, in that office, because she was being kind. There were cents under it. I've never been able to look at the cents. And my mother said, "Oh, no, no, no. That's the mix-up. Faye, is it?" Faye. She's on an employer group plan, Ashgrove Heating and Air. That's us. That's my husband's company. And there's been an ongoing carrier issue since February. We've been in it for months. And then my mother took out her phone. And she read Faye Trumbull the group number. Nobody asked her for it. Understand what just happened, because it's the only thing in this entire story that anybody did on purpose. Faye had my card in the hospital system. 11 years of it. She'd have gotten there in 9 seconds by herself. But my mother cannot let a person find something out without her in the room. That's not strategy. It's the shape of her. Somebody was about to look at a screen, and my mother had to be the one holding the flashlight. 3390. She read her own group number off her own phone to a woman she was afraid of, in a glass box, with 4 people from her church on the other side of it. Faye typed it in, and Faye said, "Hmm. I had heard that sound before. The 19th of February. My own desk, 40 feet from my mother's back. And I still didn't know. Even then, I heard it and I thought, here we go. Another round of this." Faye said, "Ms. Ashgrove, you're showing termed on this group." And my mother said, "That's right. That's exactly it. That's what we've been fighting since February." Watch. The identical move. From the same woman. And it had worked every time for 5 months, and she had no reason on earth to think it wouldn't work on a clerk. "But Faye Trumbull is not a daughter," Faye said. "No, ma'am. There's no error flag. There's no open case. Keys. There's a rider on file. It's attached right here. That's why I can see it." And then Faye Trumbull did the most ordinary thing anybody did all week. She read it out loud, because that's her job, to sit with a patient and read the account to them so they know what's on it. Termination of coverage rider, employee, Ren Ashgrove, effective date of termination, 31st of December. The 31st of December. I can't tell you what that felt like. So I'll tell you what I did. I did arithmetic. I sat in a wheelchair with a pillow against 22 staples and did arithmetic. Because that's what I am. The 15th of December. I said the words 9 weeks in her kitchen and she screamed into her hands. The 31st of December. 16 days. And Faye kept going, because it was a form, and forms have a bottom. And it's signed. Small group needs 2 officers, so there's 2. Her finger moved. Russell Ashgrove, Diane Ashgrove, dated the 29th of December. The 29th. 14 days after the scream. And I heard, from the doorway, my father shift his weight. That's all. That's every single thing Russell Ashgrove contributed to the 11th of June. He moved his feet. The balloons went up against the ceiling tile when he did. Mylar on acoustic tile sounds like a fingernail on a paper bag, and it went on a while, and nobody said anything. And out in the corridor, a monitor 2 doors down was doing the thing monitors do that means absolutely nothing. And my mother said, "Well, that forms a placeholder." A placeholder. That's a year-end thing, Faye. Every small business in America does that at year-end. You'd have to talk to our broker. She didn't confess. My mother has never confessed to anything in her life, and she wasn't going to start in a glass box on a Wednesday. She looked at a page with her own signature on it and reclassified it. That's a woman who has never believed a document could outrank her, being handed a document that outranked her, and calmly explaining that it must be a different kind of document. And then Faye Trumbull asked her question. Understand why she asked it, because everybody gets it backward. Faye Trumbull was trying to help me. That's the job. She's not a cop. She's a woman whose entire professional purpose is to find any road at all that ends with a $61,000 bill not landing on a woman with staples in her. And she'd found a thread. Because if an employee was paying premiums for a plan the employer had canceled, then somewhere in that mess, there might be a reinstatement, a broker error, an obligation, some door. She was looking for a door for me. She said, "Okay. So, if the coverage ended the 31st of December, Ms. Ashgrove, were you still having a premium taken out of your check?" And I said, "I don't know. I'd have to look." And Sam said, "It's in the truck." Sam Boyd, 33, who had not said one word since the elevator. He said, "There's a folder in the truck." And he was already moving. 4 minutes. Sit in 4 minutes with me. Nobody said anything. Faye found something on her desk to align. My father held 6 balloons in a doorway. And my mother put her handbag down and wiped her hands on her coat. Twice. They were dry. And through 3 walls of glass, 4 people from a church in the town I grew up in watched a family sit in silence. Sam came back with the green folder, and he did not hand it to me. He handed it to Faye. I've asked him about that. He says his hands just went that way. I think, and he'd never say it, I think my husband spent those 4 minutes out by the elevators doing the arithmetic I'd been refusing to do since February, and he got to the end of it. And he knew the only thing in that folder that could help his wife was a stranger's hands on it. Faye opened it. Left pocket, bills, right pocket, stubs. Because that's where those go. Because a woman taught me that at a kitchen island when I was 20 years old. And I have never once put them in the wrong pocket. And she was sitting 3 feet away. And Faye Trumbull started laying them out on the desk. And she counted out loud. Clerks count out loud. Nobody teaches them to. They just do. Because the number has to be said or it isn't real. 15th of January, 6804. 31st of January, 6804. 15th of February. She stopped there. A second. Because the 15th of February is 4 days after a woman stood at a pharmacy counter. And Faye Trumbull didn't know that. And it didn't matter. She felt something and kept going. 28th of February, 15th of March, 31st of March, 15th of April, 30th of April, 15th of May, and then she squared them up and looked at them. 9. 9 pieces of paper on a desk in a fishbowl. My mother's handwriting isn't on them. Nothing is. They're printouts from a payroll service in another state. The one she couldn't reach. The one she never thought about. The one that had been quietly writing all this down for 5 months while she stood in a parking lot in sneakers killing a photocopy. And Faye said the number. That's $612.36 in employee premium contributions, collected after the termination date on your own rider. $612.36. That's the whole take. That's what the crime was worth. $136 a month. For 5 months. Out of a girl who ran the service board. And that is not why they did it. If it were about money, I think I could have forgiven it. Money is a reason. Money is a thing people can be sick about. There's a boat. And then Faye Trumbull said the sentence that took my family apart. And she said it apologetically. I'm not accusing anybody of anything. I have to code this, and there's no code for it. And she scrolled. That poor woman sat there and scrolled a drop-down menu looking for the option. And there isn't one. Because nobody built one. Because the people who build those menus did not think of this. And she said, "Somebody's going to have to tell me what to write down." And that's when my mother stood up. Not at Faye, not at me. She turned around and went to the glass. Because there were people out there. My mother has never let a silence do its work. And I finally understand why. A silence is a room with nobody watching, and my mother would rather be convicted than unwatched. And she said, loud, to a corridor, in a hospital, 11 years. 11 years we carried her. Do you know what that plan cost this company? Do you know what she cost us? 3 rounds. 3 rounds of treatments. Every dime of it through our group. And our rates went up every single year. And I never said one word to her about it. Not one word. Ask anybody. And there it was. She never said terminated. She never said I did it. My mother did not confess to a crime on the 11th of June, and she never has. And she never will. She confessed to the other thing, the one underneath. She stood in a hospital and explained to 4 people from her church that her daughter's dead babies had raised the company's premiums. 6 years, 3 rounds, 2 losses. My mother had been keeping a tab. She'd been at every one. She drove me to one of them. She held my hair. And she was running a meter. And then, because she needed somewhere to land, my mother reached for the sentence that has carried her for 40 years, the one she gave me at an island when I was 20 like a key to a city. She said it to the glass. Everybody carries their share. That's all this family has ever asked. Everybody carries their share. Or it isn't a company, it's a charity. And nobody moved. Ward Pettibone didn't move. Lorraine didn't move. Faye Trumbull looked at her desk. My father held the balloons, so she said it again. Everybody carries their share. And her voice went. Right in the middle. On the word share. It came apart on her. In a corridor. In front of everyone she has ever wanted to be seen by. That's what it sounds like when a sentence that has held a woman up for 40 years finally can't. Everybody assumes I felt something in that moment. Triumph. They mean. I felt about 9 years old, and I felt sorry for Faye Trumbull, who had come to work that morning. And then Ward Pettibone spoke. Ward is past 60. He runs a 2-truck plumbing outfit 40 minutes from here. He's known my father since before I was born, and he had driven to a hospital on a Wednesday to look at a baby through a window. He was holding one of the balloons. She'd handed him one in the parking lot. And Ward Pettibone said, Diane, he said, did you take it out of her check after? And my mother said, Ward, you don't understand the... And Ward said, it's a yes or a no. And my mother did not say either one. She stood there about 6 seconds with her mouth slightly open, and Ward Pettibone looked at the floor, and then he did the only thing left to do with his hands. He gave the balloon back to her. He held it out, and she took it. And he walked to the elevator. I didn't raise my voice. I know what you're waiting for, and it isn't coming. I never accused my mother of anything. I have never said one word to her about that rider. Not that day. Not since. Every single thing that happened in that room was said by a woman with a lanyard reading a document off a screen, and my mother signed that document in her own hand on a Sunday and mailed it to the carrier herself. She built it, she signed it, she filed it. Then she leaned across a desk and read the clerk the group number so she'd find it faster. I asked exactly one question in that office, and it wasn't about her. I said, Faye, can I still get her covered? Faye Trumbull looked up so fast, and she said, the baby? Honey? Yes. Yes. Birth's a qualifying event. That's a brand new 60-day window. The baby's clean. The baby's fine. And I said, okay. That's all I wanted. That's the only thing that had been in my body for 3 days. And notice what everybody in that glass box noticed, because it's the reason none of them ever spoke to my mother again. I asked about the baby. My mother had been talking for 11 minutes and had not. And that's when I said the only sentence I said to my mother on the 11th of June. I turned my head. I couldn't turn my body. You can't. Not at 3 days. And looked at her standing against the glass holding a stork balloon. And I said, Mom, did you hold her yet? And my mother said, they won't let us up. They've got rules about... And I didn't say anything. Because I wrote their names on a form at 2 o'clock in the morning on the 9th of June with a hand that wouldn't hold still, 4 hours out of an operating room, bleeding, so that my mother could hold my daughter. They'd been cleared since Monday. Nobody had stopped them. They had been in that building for 2 hours, on the 3rd floor, where the chairs are. Here's what happened after. And I'm going to give it to you straight, because I've had about enough of stories that end the way people want them to. Faye Trumbull couldn't code it, so she did what anybody does with a thing that won't fit in a box. She sent it up, wrote a note, attached the rider, kicked it to billing, and billing did the most boring thing in the world. They called the carrier to verify coverage. That's the whole engine. Nobody investigated anybody. A hospital asked an insurance company a question about an account, and somebody in compliance opened a file and put two things next to each other. A signed rider terminating an employee on the 31st of December, and a payroll file from a service in another state. The one my mother never once thought about, showing that same employee's premium collected 9 times after it. There's a name for that. When an employer withholds an employee's premium share for coverage that doesn't exist, the carrier doesn't get to shrug, because the carrier's own people have to explain to a regulator why one file at their company disagrees with another. Their own form, their own payroll. Nobody added anything. I have never filed anything. Not a complaint, not a claim, not a report. I have never made one phone call about my parents to anybody. Not the state, not the carrier, not a lawyer, not one person at that church. I was holding a 4-pound baby. My daughter was in an incubator with a tube in her nose, and I was pumping every 3 hours around the clock for a person I was allowed to hold 1 hour a day. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have an afternoon. Revenge is a hobby for people who are sleeping. The paper did it. They wrote the paper. The carrier terminated the group effective the 31st of August. Not my coverage. The group. All of it. Ashgrove Heating and Air does not have a health plan anymore, and it is not getting one, because when you get non-renewed for that. The next carrier reads the file. 14 people. Marcus Kettering is 44 and has been turning wrenches for my father since he was 26, and his boy is 9 and has type 1 diabetes. And Marcus lost his insurance on the 31st of August because 2 people signed a form in December about somebody else entirely. People ask if I feel bad about Marcus. Yes, every day. It's the wrong feeling, and I have it anyway, because you can be right about who did a thing and still be the reason it landed. And both of those get to live in you. Then, in August, the surety non-renewed the bond. You need a bond to hold commercial work, not for a ladies' furnace on Delmar, for the school district, 6 buildings. The contract my father chased for 9 years and got in 2019 and would not shut up about at Thanksgiving. A surety company runs a review, and a business that collected its employees' premiums for a plan it had canceled is not a technicality to those people. That's the entire thing they insure against. That's character. No bond, no district, and the district is the summer. Residential work in summer is feast or famine, and it does not make payroll in February. The district is what makes February exist. 11 trucks. There are 4 now. And the church found out the way churches find out everything, which is from each other. And fast. Nobody had to be told. 4 of them were standing on the other side of a pane of glass on the 11th of June. I never sent anybody anything. I didn't have to. My mother gave the deposition herself, in a corridor, at full volume, to the only 4 people whose opinion she has ever actually cared about. Bev Lindquist quit in July, 27 years. She called me from her car the day she did it, 67 years old, husband with a bad hip, and she said, "I'm out. I did it. I'm sitting here shaking." And I said, "Bev, why now?" And Bev Lindquist said, "It isn't now, honey." And then she told me a thing about 2011 that I'm not going to tell you tonight. And the $61,000? Faye Trumbull. She sat down with me on the 23rd of June with a form and my tax return and ran the hospital's financial assistance program, which I didn't know existed, which almost nobody knows exists, because with me out of work, Our household income for the year had collapsed into a bracket that qualified. 11 minutes. I timed it, because I count things. $53,000, written off. A woman with a lanyard and a 5K mug did more for my family in 11 minutes than my mother did in 6 months. And she did it because I sat down in front of her, and she felt like it. The rest is $8,000, at $75 a month. Which is the number I picked because it's the number I can do. I'll be paying for my daughter's first 3 days until she's 9 years old. If you've ever been handed a number by somebody who was being kind, and known you'd be carrying it into a life you hadn't gotten to yet, you already know what that folder feels like on a shelf. I'd sit with that a minute if I were you. I do. Most weeks. My father came in September. He drove out, didn't call, stood in my driveway and would not come up the steps. And I stood in the doorway. And he held out an envelope. A check. $612.36. The exact take. To the penny. He'd sat down somewhere with the 9 stubs and a calculator and done the only thing Russell Ashgrove has ever known how to do with a feeling, which is turn it into a number and hand it to somebody. Not 61,000. He doesn't have 61,000. $612.36. The one part of this he could actually make right. So, he made it right. And drove 40 minutes to hold it out to a daughter who wouldn't come down the steps. I took it. Everybody expects me to say I tore it up. I cashed it. On a Tuesday. It's the best money I have ever spent. And I'll tell you what I did with it in a minute. But first, I have to tell you about the crib. People ask me why I kept the crib. Sam asked once. Carefully. In September. My friends don't ask. They look at it. And then they look at me. Here's why. My father built that crib in a weekend and didn't tell a soul. Wrapped it in the moving blankets he uses for compressors. Put the hardware in a coffee can. Left it in my garage. And never said one word about it. Then or since. 11 days later, he signed his name on the second line of a page that ended my daughter's health coverage before she had a spine. Both of those men are my father. There's no version of this where I get to have one of them. And my daughter sleeps in it. Every night. She was 4 pounds, 1 ounce, and she's 24 pounds now. And in the morning, she stands up and shakes the rail like a little inmate. And that rail does not move. It has never moved. Because Russell Ashgrove built it. And that man has never in his life built one thing that moved. I'm not throwing away the only honest hour my father ever had because of what he did with the rest of them. That crib is the only thing he ever said out loud. He can come to the shop. He sits on a bucket and hands me things. He doesn't come in the house. And he's never once asked to. And I think we both understand that the driveway is the arrangement. My mother has seen Nell twice. I'm not going to be the person who decides a child doesn't get a grandmother. I've had enough people in my family make decisions about somebody else's whole life on a Sunday afternoon with a pen. So here are the terms. And they took me a year to say, without my voice doing something. She comes here. She doesn't take her. She doesn't have a key. She has never been alone in a room with my daughter and never will be. And she has never asked to be. Which tells you the thing I'd rather not know. And the rule under all the rules. She doesn't handle anything. Not a form. Not a call. Not a doctor's office. Not a school. Not a birth certificate. My mother is welcome in my daughter's life, and my mother will never again stand between my daughter and a piece of paper. That's not forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't a thing I've gotten to, and I might not. That's the shape of my life now, and she can have the part of it that happens where I can see her. Now, the $612.36. Marcus Kettering has 2 trucks. He went out on his own in October, took the leap at 44 with a diabetic kid, which is the bravest thing I've ever watched a person do. And Kettering Mechanical runs out of a rented bay off the county road, Which, if you know anything about my father, is a joke so good. Nobody in that family will ever say it out loud. I run his service board. 6 feet of whiteboard. Every magnet is a house with no heat in it. And when it's the lady on Delmar at 29 degrees against the restaurant on Grand that pays 4 times as much. The van goes to Delmar. The van has always gone to Delmar. That part was never my mother's. Bev Lindquist answers the phone. 67. And she was not done. And there's a tin of butterscotch in the second drawer. And in January, Kettering Mechanical bought a group health plan. 4 people. That's what the $612.36 did. It didn't cover it. A plan for 4 costs what it costs. It paid the broker's fee, and the first month, and change. My father's money bought the first month of health insurance for the man whose foundation he laid. And I've never told him. And I'm not going to. I wrote the handbook. 4 pages. Marcus said, "Write whatever you want." Ren. I don't know how any of this goes. And there's one line I wrote first, before anything else. At my kitchen table at 11 at night with the folder still up on the shelf over the microwave. The company carries the plan. Nobody's share comes out of a check. That's the whole policy. Marcus doesn't fully understand why it's the first line. He signed it anyway, because he's a man who trusts the person doing the books. And that's a thing I think about at 2 in the morning more than I'd like to. I told you I'd come back to that word. Everybody carries their share. She was right. That's the thing I can't put down. My mother was right. It's the truest sentence she ever said. And she gave it to me at a kitchen island when I was 20 like a key to a city. And I have never stopped believing it. I carried mine. 11 years, $1,632.96 a year. Off the top. Before I ever touched it. And I never asked for $1 of it back. I carried the 2 a.m. calls. I carried the board. I carried the card for a household where the other adult couldn't have one. And on the 8th of June, at 11:52 at night, I carried 4 pounds and 1 ounce. I have never in my life not carried my share. And here's the thing I turn over in the dark. The theft is the proof. Those 9 stubs are the only document on this earth that says who I was. My mother spent 5 months quietly taking my share out of my check for a room she'd already locked, and twice a month. Without meaning to. On a server in another state she never thought about. She generated a receipt. 9 of them. 9 pieces of paper that say, "This woman paid. On time. Every time. For a thing she was never going to get." My mother wanted a daughter who carried her share. She built the evidence of one, in 9 installments, and then leaned across a desk and read a clerk the group number so she'd find it faster. Everybody wants to tell you blood is thicker? Nobody ever tells you what it's thicker than. It's thicker than paper. That's all it means. It's a fluid. And it's thicker than a piece of paper. And people say it like it settles something. On the 11th of June, in a glass box on the 3rd floor of a hospital, the paper won. The paper is the only thing in my whole life that ever told me the truth on the first try. Which brings me to the last one. I could get into those jeans again in October. They'd been in the closet since the 2nd week of February. And I put them on one morning because they were there. And I put my hand in the back pocket the way you do. And there was a sticky note in it. Special enroll, March 1st. My handwriting, blue pen, written at a desk on the 19th of February by a woman who did the right thing for about 90 seconds, then walked 40 feet and traded it for a feeling. A stranger on a telephone gave me that. She didn't know me. She had a script and a headset and 400 people in her building, and she gave me the truth in 9 seconds. For free. And I put it in my pocket, because my mother's voice was warmer. It's on my refrigerator now, under the strawberry magnet, the one that held the 2nd of March. The magnet's the same. The paper under it is different. And every morning I walk past a piece of paper that told me the truth and a magnet that held a lie. And they're the same shape. And they're both mine. And you cannot tell which is which by looking. If this one sat somewhere in you, if you're carrying a number somebody handed you, or a folder you can't take off the shelf, leave the like. And send it to the one person who'd get it without you having to explain the whole thing. There's another one waiting in the description whenever you want it. And one more thing before I go. Bev Lindquist sat in a parking lot in July, 67 years old, shaking, and told me it wasn't about me. It was about 2011, a man who used to work there, and a check my mother wrote, and a thing she did that Bev has been carrying around in her chest for 14 years. That's Bev's story, not mine. I asked her if I could tell it. She said she'd think about it. Another night, maybe. I put my daughter down in my father's crib tonight, the way I do. There's a thing she does where she gets a fist around your finger going under and won't let go. And you can't pull, so you stand there in the dark with your arm through the rail until she lets go on her own. It takes about 4 minutes. I know exactly how long 4 minutes is. I learned it in a glass box on the 11th of June, waiting for a man to come back from a parking garage with a folder. Same 4 minutes, standing still, holding on to nothing, while somebody else decides. Last night my hand went to sleep, and I let it. 4 pounds, 1 ounce. She doesn't carry a thing. That's the whole job. She gets to not carry it. And nobody tells you that's the job. And it's the only thing I've ever been any good at. Doors, not walls. Same chair next time.